the best interviews you could ever do were with someone away from the track. And that's what we were always trying to do. And we'd go to the teams and we'd say, we want to do this, we want to do this, we want to do this. You have all these human conversations with them, and the teams, you'd go to them and they'd say, no, they just want to talk about racing. And then Drive to Survive come in and it's suddenly like, did you know Daniel Ricciardo's this great, funny human being? And it's like, yeah.
Hello and welcome to Outlines, a podcast about sport, stories and the media. My name's Owen Connolly, hope you're well. It is great to have you listening. There's an argument to be made that the most interesting sports media case study of the last decade is Formula One. Let's unpack that for a second. Since its takeover by Liberty Media in 2017, the world's premier motorsport series has tried a whole range of ways to build and diversify its audience, from changes in its social media strategy to the creation of the Netflix series Drive to Survive, partnerships with playful brands like Lego and Disney, and a blockbuster motion picture. F1 the movie became the highest grossing sports film of all time over the summer and hits Apple TV this month. Oh, and there have been more races in more places as well, with 24 Grand Prix on the 2025 calendar, helping the sport spin up narratives and grab attention all year round. So what has that looked like from the seat of a seasoned observer? Rebecca Clancy began on the circuit late in the Bernie Ecclestone era and has been there throughout the age of Liberty. She spent several years as the motorsport correspondent at the Times and had a stint as editor-in-chief at Autosport, but recently chose to strike out on her own as a freelance journalist and commentator and co-host of the Inside The Piranha Club podcast. So she's ideally placed to offer an informed perspective, not just on the changing storytelling environment around F1, but what that means on a practical level, the many different lenses on the sport now, the evolving relationship between teams, drivers and the media, and the reality of life for reporters and creators. We got into all of that, as well as the prospect of Apple's looming broadcast partnership. And given that we're sensitively poised at the time of recording between the penultimate and final Grand Prix of the campaign, we take a very carefully framed look back at a dramatic 2025 season and ask what it might mean for the future. That's to come. As ever, if you're enjoying the podcast, then don't be shy in telling people. Subscribe, rate and review on your favourite platform. Social media details are in the show notes, so get involved there too. And naturally, I do appreciate the support. This one is a really fascinating conversation. I think you'll like it. Here is Rebecca Clancy. Travelling for a race week, what does that look like for you?
Under a cloud of probably extreme tiredness, a lot of packing, sorting out childcare. I've got 2 little kids. So the in-laws are currently on their way down now. I'm flying out to Abu Dhabi in about 24 hours or so from now. We're recording. Throwing a bag together. I give my mother-in-law a bit of a heart attack at how last minute I leave everything. But I'm just so used to it. I know exactly what I need. I know exactly how to do it. The bag is ready to go. So it's not as stressful as some people might think it is. I think when you spend so many weekends in an airport, I have it down to a fine art. I can do it in as few minutes as is necessary. But I'm not that person, by the way. I still travel with people who've been doing this job for a very long time and they still get to the airport 3 hours, 4 hours early. I am very much that person who pushes it until last minute I can, basically.
Well, it's efficient. As long as you don't miss any flights, you
I've never missed a flight yet.
Well, there you go. You're doing something right. That's a kind of a point of change, isn't it? And even the time you've been covering the sport, where are we now? 22
24
races? 24 races. There you go. Didn't know that off the top of my head even. Which is, that's every other week. And obviously through huge parts of the season, that's every week. And that's, for the sport as a whole, that kind of gives an impression of, I guess, the impact of some of the changes and also the way that its relationship with its audience has changed as well, because it's much more always on than it was sort of 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, even when I started, we were in the realm of 18, 19 races, and it's gone up to 24. And that's very much a case of Liberty Media, the people, the company that took over at the start of 2017. They've very much built up the calendar. We've got 3 races in America now, more places, we're told, more that want to host a race. I don't think we'll go much higher than 24. I think we're fairly close to breaking point for everyone who travels on the circuit. At the moment, we are in the season finale coming into Abu Dhabi, and this is a triple header, and it's a fairly ugly triple header. It starts with Las Vegas, and then it goes to Qatar, and then to Abu Dhabi. We experimented as a sport with triple headers, so 3 race weekends on the trot, back in sort of COVID times, just to try and get them in, and obviously it kind of made sense traveling as little as possible, really, and just sort of cramming the race weekends in. At that time, we were told that we would never have them again. Like, don't get used to them. We know they're a lot of work. But don't worry, they're not here to stay. And unfortunately, they are here to stay. And we have multiple triple headers in a year now. Double headers used to be difficult enough, but now we have quite a few triple headers. And you just kind of accept it. I mean, for the drivers, it's okay. They're in and out on private jets. For the rest of us who are still flying the budget airlines, it's a bit more brutal. And then for the mechanics, it's even worse because they are out there the Monday before a race. They're the ones packing up at the end of the race. It's a brutal schedule, and you can sort of see it in the turnover of staff, even within the teams, that it's, it takes its toll. The teams try as best as they can to rotate the traveling staff. It's not always straightforward, obviously, and obviously you can't rotate the drivers. So yeah, it's a grueling schedule, but I think we're at the capacity now. I think Liberty have got to the number that they're comfortable with at 24. The regulations say it can go to 25, but it doesn't feel like we're going to, because like you say, where are we now? Early December, 1st of December. It's going to be March to December. We've got winter testing starting next year in January because we've got a whole new load of regulations coming in. So that winter break that used to be when everyone used to, have some time off, it's sort of disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah. And as much as from a media perspective, and we'll spend most of our time in this conversation talking about that, it has become more international, more, there's different kind of regional hubs of support and regional hubs of interest with the new Grand Prix that are on the circuit. Like, people still have to be based somewhere, and they are primarily based in Western Europe still. So you can condense that part of the season down a little bit more readily than you can, where you're in the Middle East one week and you've just come from kind of the American West the previous week. You could barely get further apart before you start coming back the other way.
No, I mean, fair play to Liberty, because they have tried to make the calendar make a bit more sense. So, for example, we go to Australia and then we go to China and Japan, and it's trying to keep everything sort of in that region. And obviously there's the same challenges that every company is having about the carbon footprint and sustainability, and so that's also very much part of it, because it's a huge operation, as you can probably imagine, to get all of the freight around the world. Exactly. And then, like you say, it's that hub of interest and trying to keep people coming to races, trying to keep them engaged. And from the media perspective, in the sense of the length of the season, you do have a lot more engagement. So it's that kind of double-edged sword, isn't it? Are you oversaturated, so people lose interest because one race isn't as important as it used to be because now there are 24? Or do you have the argument that there's a rolling narrative now, so there's always something going on? F1 is always in the media and there's always an interest in it. And within that, obviously, since Liberty came in, their big focus was the US, because they see that as a big growth market for them. And we now have 3 races there in the US, but then it's almost a bit sort of to the detriment of Asia. So initially, in pre-COVID, we were going to Vietnam, and the Vietnam race has it's gone now because it didn't survive COVID, unfortunately, and the government support that it had there, bit of corruption actually, but not on F1's part, I should say, sort of on the Vietnam side. So that now they're kind of looking back at Asia, and then obviously we have the big gaping hole that is Africa, and we don't have a race there. And obviously Lewis Hamilton has very much been pushing for a race in Africa. They have toyed with the idea of going to South Africa, Kyalami, the track that's there. It's not actually fit for purpose at the moment. You can probably imagine the amount of regulations and boxes that have to be ticked to get a race underway. and it's rightly very high because of safety reasons. But yeah, so in terms of the media landscape in that one, there has been a big shift to the US. But there are definitely still territories that Liberty are looking at to expand into, while also the challenge of trying to get the calendar to make a bit more sense regionally.
Yeah. What's your place in all this now? You were on the beat with the Times for a number of years, and you've kind of shifted into a couple of different roles since then. What's your position at the moment?
Yeah, so I was at the Times for 10 years, the last 7 as the F1 correspondent. And then I left because I didn't want to go to every race anymore, to be completely honest. I made the decision after the Vegas Abu Dhabi doubleheader, as it was at the end of when did I leave? 24. So 2023, I made the decision at the end of that season. Honestly, I was a bit broken. I was utterly exhausted. The traveling is really hard. You're at the back of the plane. It's just an extreme amount of traveling. The jet lag. It's tough. It's really, really difficult. And then I got an amazing job offer. I hadn't really expected to. I thought I would go freelance. And then I got an amazing job offer to join Motorsport Network, the largest media motorsport company in the world. And that was really fun. And I was put in charge of Autosport, which was founded the same weekend as the first ever Formula One race back in 1950, or Formula One as we know it now, I should say. So celebrating its 75th anniversary this year. Brilliant publication. Magazine went monthly, was weekly, now monthly. Websites, subscription. So really proud to have spearheaded that. And then while I was there, I got promoted to run all of their publications, so Motorsport as well. They have new ownership. And at the start of this year, where are we now, 25, May 25, I kind of was starting to wonder, I was sort of slipping back into my feeling of, actually, I think I want to go freelance. I think I don't want a full-time job. I want a bit more flexibility. I think F1 is grueling enough. And I kind of couldn't shake that feeling that I had the year previously when I left the Times, that actually I did want to go freelance. So now I have gone freelance. I have my own podcast, Inside The Piranha Club, which I host alongside a friend and former colleague, Ben Hunt, which is really fun. And that is very much looking at, we do race previews and race reviews. We started doing guest interviews, and it's not always so much about what happens on the track. Formula One is a fantastic sport for the politics and people, the personalities, the rivalries, the war of words that we often have. It is as much as about what happens off the track as what happens on the track. The Piranha Club is an expression that Bernie Ecclestone actually came up with, and it was to welcome the team principal who'd just come into the sport back in I think it was the 90s, and he said, "Welcome to the Piranha Club." Right. Which tells you everything you need to know about the paddock. So we called our podcast Inside the Piranha Club because, we kind of delve into all of that. Ben and I have been in the sport a long time now. We know all the people involved. There are plenty of podcasts that, from my bedroom, as we joke, but they've never actually been into the paddock. And that shows you the popularity of the sport, because that didn't really exist even sort of 5 years ago. Content creators, loads and loads of content creators now. Again, not really in the paddock. The rules around filming within the paddock are unbelievably strict, which I'll come to. But the media landscape within F1 has completely changed. So, the legacy media of the Fleet Street correspondents, who very much were the front and center of the media center of the press pack, they are now still there, very much still there, still doing a brilliant job. We obviously have the broadcasters in Sky, for example, in the UK here, who are the rights holders, and then Channel 4 obviously do the highlights packages. But we now have all these different media outlets coming in that didn't really exist even when I started, showing off my age. So you have those content creators, like I said, you have the podcasters, you have the bloggers, the newsletters. It's a much more varied media landscape within F1 now. And I think one of the biggest challenges that F1 is facing, and they are trying to get their head around, is, as I say, Sky exclusive rights holders, they're paying £100 million a year for that, give or take. Obviously, they never confirmed the number to us. But it's big. It's around that number, certainly. And they want to be the people who are where you go to watch the footage, which you can understand. What that means, though, is when you're in the paddock on a media pass, you are so restricted as to what you can do. So, for example, I couldn't even record my podcast from within the circuit track limitations. I can't film anything that happens on track. I can't actually really film anything inside the track. I can't interview any drivers on a broadcast. So I couldn't go in as part of my podcast and do an audio interview. You can do written interviews, that's fine, but you couldn't do any audio interviews. But you can get content creators who go in on a different sort of pass, so not a media pass, and they can film whatever they want. And so you have the traditional media like myself, even though I've obviously shifted over into podcasting now, but I'm still considered traditional media. I think I've just been around that long, who can't film, don't feel like they can get the content they need. And then you have these other content creators who come in and they are given carte blanche, or the flip side of what's happening at the moment, and a big push for Liberty when they came in as owners, is trying to get into the culture side of racing. And that's quite a difficult thing to define. What does the culture of racing mean? And I don't necessarily mean, the kind of watches or fashion, but it's very much the drivers, the lifestyles, what kind of happens away from the track. And so they invite the likes of, let's say, GQ or Vogue to come in, and they obviously do a very different piece to what your F1 correspondents are writing. And they have a bit of carte blanche to do what they like within the paddock. So at the moment, you have all these different types of media, and they are all trying to work together. We ultimately have one goal. If Formula One is succeeding, we're all succeeding. It's all about getting more eyeballs. Everybody wants to grow. We're all pushing in the same direction. However, we don't all get the same rights within the paddock. And that is quite difficult. And it obviously causes friction, as you can probably imagine.
Yeah.
Because it feels like, these new media, let's call them new media, who come in and they kind of film whatever they want and get the access that we've been, banging on the door for a long time. And for us, it's much more restrictive. And I think you see it in the numbers, for example, in US sports. Their growth is obviously that younger 18 to 24. And they are doing that through social media by allowing the content creators, the influencers, to go and film and, put all the media out there. And what ends up happening is that those people who come in through social media then get directed to go onto the more mainstream platforms to actually watch it, your NBCs of the world and ESPNs. But that's not happening in Formula One. And Formula One, you can see from their numbers, they're not attracting in the same degree that 18 to 24 bracket that they really, really want, because social media is still such a tricky world to try and navigate.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots to pick through there and get a chance to go through that as we go. But let's just kind of contrast that with the world that you came into, because you were so you were at the Times for 10 years, so you were kind of coming in towards the end of the Eccleston era, and things were heavily controlled in lots of different ways, and there was kind of a tension within the sport about how we're going to break this up, how can we give drivers a bit more of a voice, etc. And as you say, there's been an opening up, but there's still that tension now. But how does that compare with the world that you came into?
I mean, did Bernie Eccleston even know what social media was? I suspect, yes, he's an incredibly smart man, but he had no interest in it. And for him, it did not form any part of any business model that he was looking at within the sport. And when I came in, it was incredibly difficult to get a paddock pass. It's still a bit tricky now, not impossible, but back then it was, kind of the holy grail really of access within Formula One. And you had to jump through a lot of hoops to get a paddock pass. And this is how sort of silly it gets within Formula One. Back then, if you were a permanent pass holder, you would have it was a red pass, lanyards. You'll see them every time you watch Formula One, you'll see everyone has a lanyard around them. And if you had a red one, it meant you were full-time and you had full access. You could go wherever, including on the grid before the start of the race. You got everywhere. And when Liberty came in, they got rid of those red passes, and it upset a lot of people, because the red pass had always been the thing which kind of stood you out and meant you were almost important, perceived important within the sport. And Liberty came in and they just got rid of them. So that was kind of the first thing they did. And then they're now purple, in case you're wondering, for media. And then they opened up social media to the teams and to the drivers. And this was possibly the biggest change that they made within the first few months of taking over at the start of 2017. It was a really easy win. They literally just said, turn on your cameras, put what you like on social media. there were a few things they weren't allowed to do. Nothing will shock you, nothing offensive, nothing, it was all basically as long as it's good for the sport, good for the team. And of course, the teams only ever put out what's good for them. And it was astronomical how that took off. And then you were getting all these slightly disingenuous numbers saying, we've grown our social media by X, Y, 100%, blah, blah. And you're thinking, well, the baseline was 0. So, that's what the growth should be. But that was a huge win. And the drivers loved it, absolutely loved it, because for the first time they had access to their fans. They always used to have to go through us at the Times or the Sun, Daily Mail, Telegraph, whoever it was, to speak to the teams, to speak to the fans, sorry. And, there's always that push and pull between the athletes and the newspapers, and everyone thinks everyone's out for each other. And it's actually really not like that at all. But now they had this access to their own fans. And what we noticed within the traditional media was that we weren't getting the same access, and they didn't need us anymore. So we were having to try and be a bit more clever about how we were requesting time with drivers, with team principals, with whoever we needed within the team. And so that led to a bit of a tricky couple of years, 18, 19. And at that point as well, obviously, Netflix came in. And then we had the absolute juggernaut that is Drive to Survive. And that has completely changed the face of the sport. It's changed the fandom. It changed the game, really.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit in terms of the stories that for you as a correspondent, you became aware were of interest to your audience, because you would have been immersed in this world and you thought, this guy's a character, this guy's really insightful, this, she's got a really important story to tell over here. But you wouldn't have necessarily been able to go to your editor and say, I'm going to go and sit down with this person for an afternoon, or I'm going to explain to you how this particular rule change is going to affect how this team's approaching this particular rule change, whatever it might be, because it was always meat and potatoes, tell us about the sport kind of thing.
No, I was going to say, actually, that's not the case for Fleet Street at all. So right, okay. we as a sort of all of us together, we actually don't care that much about what tyres they're on, or how their front wing is set up, or what engine mode they're on. Like, that's all fairly, nuts and bolts, boring stuff, let's be honest. What we were always trying to do was get to the personalities, get to the stories, get to the best interviews you could ever do were with someone away from the track. And that's what we were always trying to do. And we'd go to the teams and we'd say, we want to do this, we want to do this, we want to do this. And the editors would be like, yeah, this is great, let's get this done. And I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go, I'm going to try, this is what we want to do. And so we were forever trying to do interviews to just get to know them a bit better. I've interviewed Lewis Hamilton a million times, and the best interviews you have with him is when he's not talking about racing. And it's great. And it's the same with Max Verstappen. I remember a really odd conversation I had with him when he just got his new cats, and I've got cats. And so we were talking about, and he was saying, when do they stop pooing on the floor? And it's like, you have all these human conversations with them, and the teams, you'd go to them and they'd say, no, they just want to talk about racing. And then Drive to Survive come in, and it's suddenly like, did you know Daniel Ricciardo is this great, funny human being? And it's like, yeah.
So it's that way around, basically. It's on the corporate side that they've become alive.
Yeah, so the team suddenly realised,
on your side in the
media. So we were kind of, this is what we were banging on the door with them and saying. And I remember saying to Toto Wolff, it's like, this is what we've been asking for. And he was like, no, we get it. Drive to Survive came in. Obviously, that was arranged by Formula One Liberty, and they gave them carte blanche. The teams do have the right to veto what's in Drive to Survive. But mostly they just let it go because, you need a bit of controversy and whatever. And then the teams came out and they were like, oh, they actually do want to see this side of the drivers and the personalities. And Liberty came in and said, look, we want to make the drivers the stars. We want them to be front and center. And then alongside that, we want to make every race a Super Bowl, as they called it, which they've done to a great degree. But it was very much getting inside the drivers, getting them out there, using their profiles to build the sport, which is what we had been trying to do all along. And so it was frustrating in one sense, but also because Drive to Survive had come in and done it, it actually then made our jobs slightly easier to say to them, okay, we want to do this. But then we are still battling that they have their own social media, so they can do it anyway. But I think the understanding, and one thing, credit to the teams, is that, between Fleet Street, which is, my background, that's what I know, we had millions of readers daily. and you look at Sky, and not to diminish Sky because it's obviously paid subscription service, but they are getting sort of 500,000 viewers on a race day. So you can't discredit Fleet Street, even though it's legacy media, and even though people think legacy media is dead, it's absolutely not. It absolutely isn't. Still getting millions of readers a day across the board. So actually, to be fair to the teams and to the sport, they did realise that. So we had a couple of tricky years while we were all finding out what the others were doing, but I think it's settled back down again now. And actually, the friction that was there for a couple of years has gone.
Yeah. What was the effect? I'm trying to get the timeline straight in my head now of when Drive to Survive launched, because it had a couple of years where it was limited numbers of teams, but that was like 2019 was the first.
Yeah, so 2018, I think it first came in, and Max Verstappen wasn't part of it. Ferrari refused to take part. Mercedes did it begrudgingly. Lewis Hamilton wasn't really involved. To be honest, I don't personally think it's very good. But I say that as knowing full well that I am not the target audience, and as someone who lives and breathes every second of it. It got incredibly lucky, and Formula One, to their credit, do acknowledge this. It got so lucky with COVID and lockdown and people being very bored, and it took you inside a sport, and it did a very, very good job of getting to know the personalities and the drivers and drumming up a bit of drama that wasn't always there, let's say. Sometimes the storylines were inflated. And then we had that phenomenal 2021 season where Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton were going wheel to wheel every single weekend. We went into the season finale in Abu Dhabi, equal on points. And then we had that ridiculous controversy at the end where, an external factor decided the outcome of the championship, left everyone in uproar. We then ended up with this, which I've never seen before within Formula One, this tribalism among the fans, which then took off again. And so it had all these different factors, which meant that Drive to Survive and the sport got a bit lucky with the timing. So that's sort of how it happened. But the first couple of seasons, I'm not sure anyone even watched.
Yeah, and in respect to that, with the timing, because there will have been people going around in when you had the kind of limited racing coming back, and then through 2021 where everything was kind of very heavily controlled, there will have been people on the circuit. I use the kind of global circuit rather than the racetrack. But when things opened up again, you'd had those couple of years for people to sit with it and say, oh, this is now what the storytelling environment is in Formula One. And did that help from the sort of on the relationship side between you and the teams and F1, that you were then kind of more on the same page about what people wanted in terms of access to the drivers and what might be interesting to audiences and all that type of stuff?
Well, we had another issue courtesy of COVID. So Formula One, to its credit, was the first global sport to come back. It came back in July 2020, and it somehow managed to put a championship together, did a brilliant job. And as everyone was getting bored and watching Netflix, they were then able to go and watch the real thing. So that was fantastic. What was happening on our side, on the media, is that we were, some people decided to travel. I honestly never really understood that, because obviously the restrictions were incredibly high. We as a media weren't allowed to leave the media centre. We weren't allowed in the paddock, so we couldn't speak to anyone. Everything was done on Zoom calls, speaking to drivers, team principals, whoever, everything was done on Zoom. What happened into 21, where it did open up a little bit more, and actually I did go to a couple of races in 2020. I went to the Germany, and I went to the one where Hamilton won his fifth championship in Turkey. Sixth one in Turkey. And in 2021, what happened is that the teams basically decided to carry on doing the Zoom calls. So it actually took quite a long time for us as media to get back into the same room as the drivers. And even the press conferences were being done over Zoom. And so we had a couple of years where we weren't really seeing the drivers that much in terms of face-to-face. We'd see them on Zoom calls. That was fine. And most of us had been around for long enough anyway, so we had relationships with them. But the teams kept going with these Zoom calls and keeping us out of their hospitality. And before COVID, as media, we could go into whatever hospitality we wanted, and we would just go and say hello. We weren't taking the mickey. We were just all, stealing the food or whatever. We're going in and talking to people. Every now and again, we'd probably grab a bottle of water or something. But after COVID, that completely shut down, and it was made very clear to us that we weren't allowed into the hospitality suites. We weren't to see the drivers or anyone within the teams, and they kept that Zoom mentality for far longer than they probably needed to. And actually, we as a media within the media center, we got together and we started pushing back and saying, life is back to normal now. COVID isn't a thing anymore. It's just a cold again. Let's get back to doing our jobs how we do our jobs. And actually that took quite a big push from us within the media. We had to come together. It was a collaborative thing. And actually the teams, and I understand the drivers they don't love doing media. I think that's pretty clear for all to see. And this is one of the downsides of doing 24 races, is that sometimes I just saw you on Monday and I'm seeing you again on Thursday. You haven't driven a car in between. What am I going to ask you? I get it. They don't love it. We don't always love it. It felt a little bit from our side that they were perhaps taking advantage to limit the amount of media they were doing. Anyway, it is now back to normal. We are now face to face. We are welcome in hospitality again, which is good because their food is always much better than the media center. But yeah, there was a couple of tricky years in that sense. So even to go back to your initial question, that it kind of opened up their mind to how we want to approach stories and what we want to do. But it was actually the hardest thing was getting access.
Yeah. A couple of other things have kind of changed the storytelling environment, shall we say, around Formula One in the last couple of years. And I'm thinking on the commercial side primarily. You have partnerships with brands like Lego. Disney is one that's going to start next year, where it's much more like a participative community thing that they're latching onto with the storytelling that they're doing around that. I mean, how palpable is that shift in emphasis from where you're sitting, where obviously you're following things very closely, and a lot of your audience will be following things very closely as well, particularly now that you've got independent projects like Inside the Piranha Club. How conscious are you of that slight shift around Formula One, or to a degree, is it something that's always been there and now it's just being, space is being created for people to
No, you're absolutely right. The commercial side of the sport has absolutely exploded. And it's funny because we're talking about the fandom that kind of exploded 2020, 2021. It feels like the commercial side has only just expanded in the last couple of years. So that deal that they did with LVMH, which is $1 billion over 10 years, is absolutely enormous. Title sponsor, then you've within the sub brands, you obviously get Tag Her as the timing, you get Moe as the champagne. They have that is just an enormous deal. And then you have brands like Lego coming in, and that's for me, that was fantastic. So I was in Miami this year and they did the Lego cars and the drivers parade, which I don't think I've ever watched before in my life. All the drivers were driving around in the Lego cars, and I bumped into George Russell on the Monday in Miami. We ended up having breakfast at the same place, and we were just chatting, and I said, how fun was it? And honestly, he was like, it was the best thing I've ever done. It was absolutely brilliant. We need to get them at every single race. And he was just absolutely beaming about how much fun it was. And you could see it when you watched it, you could see how brilliant it was. And so I thought that was fantastic. And, I've got a 5-year-old son and he is obsessed with Lego and he loves Formula One. And so for him, the two things coming together, he's like, he's not the right age, but he's still sat there with his dad and his granddad building the Lego cars. And so that's a brilliant activation for them. And then we have Hot Wheels as well. That's another commercial deal that's come in. Yeah. And you can absolutely feel it, because one of the things that the brands have been very good at doing when they come into the paddock and whatever sponsorship they do is they invite us to things. So for example, with Lego in Miami, they kept that as quiet as they possibly could. They did a very good job of it, actually. It was supposed to be a surprise on the day, but I'm not sure it quite lasted that long. But they invited all the media down to see the Lego cars, everything under embargo. But I thought that was a really smart move, get the media involved, get everyone on board, and well, not just the media, but everyone in the paddock was invited down to see these cars. So everyone was getting involved. And then you have the likes of like Elemis, for example. So the female brands are coming in now because we can see the huge change in the fandom of far more female participation. Elemis come in, and one of the first things Elemis do is they give out goodie bags. And you're like, oh, thank you very much. And then you have Charlotte Tilbury, who are obviously sponsoring F1 Academy, which is the all-female racing series, which is one of the undercards to Formula One. Charlotte Tilbury come in and they do little goodie bags as well. And you just think it's just very smart, very simple moves by these brands to come in, to get everyone on side. And then you have the different brands that go into the team. So obviously Formula One have their own deals, and then the teams each have their own deals. We saw with Cadillac, didn't we, in Vegas, that's just gone. They had that pink Lego car, so they had done their own separate deal with Lego. And then we have, just a mind-blowing number of brands that are now within the sport. And you can see it on the race suits. You can see it on the cars. They are just littered with logos. I mean, it is a hugely, hugely wealthy sport now. We just saw Toto Wolff sell a stake in his, or part 15%, I think it was, of his stake, and he owns a third, or owned a third, of Mercedes. The team was valued at 6 billion, and that is a huge part because of all of these enormous commercial deals that are coming in, this enormous increase in eyeballs that are watching the sport, and you can absolutely tell the difference. But it really is only in the last few years.
Yeah, and what do you think? What do you think the effect is of that for you? Because these sort of audience expanding exercises, it's not all gonna. They're not all going to be interested in the same story. I mean, the Lego story is, there will be, I'm sure your son has absolutely no chance of not being a Formula One fan, but there will be kids who become invested in the sport that way. But then there'll also be kids who just like the Lego toys and they buy the Lego toys, and that's kind of the purpose of the exercise. Or it creates a different way of using Formula One as a kind of means of cultural expression or what have you. There are going to be people who are interested in the soap opera of it, the sort of Drive to Survive type of thing, or interested in the drivers or a particular driver or a particular team. And then there will be people who are petrol heads and interested in the sport in the same way that they always were. I mean, does that, particularly now that you're a freelancer and particularly now that you have these projects that you are carving out on your own, does that make you think differently about how you tell the stories that you're telling, or what stories you're telling and to whom?
I think the most important thing within the F1 media landscape now is to pick your audience. Mm-hmm. So when I was at the Times, it was very much a more Drive to Survive style, as I said, not always successfully, but more so towards the end. With Autosport, it was very much more the petrol heads. That's 75-year publication. You very much go there to get really inside the weeds of the engineering, the technical side, the strategy. That was really the kind of inside baseball, almost, as it were. And then within that stable, we had motorsport, which was much more about the cultural side of it. And then what I'm doing now with Inside the Piranha Club, we very much know, we barely even say the word tires. And if we talk about tires, it's a very quick glancing mention and gone again. It's very much about the politics, the gossip, the drama, there's obviously what's going on with McLaren at the moment with, as we just saw in Qatar, this mistake that they made with their strategy calls. We'll absolutely talk about that. But what we'll get into is actually what's going on behind the scenes. What are the decisions being made? Why are they making these decisions? Is there favoritism happening of Lando Norris over Oscar Piastri because of the history that Lando Norris has with the CEO, Zach Brown? And so we'll get much more into that side of it rather than talking about, the safety car came out on lap 7. But, we'll obviously have to reference it for context. So I think because the landscape is now so vast and there is so much to cover, I think there is plenty of room for all these different types of media. And I think that's brilliant, because I think when the different brands come in, do you want to be B2B? Do you want to be B2C? Who's your target audience? Where do you want to go? And so you have to decide who you're targeting. So you look at it. So let's say you want to go for sponsorship, and who doesn't want sponsorship on their podcast? But then you have to decide what brands you want to go for. Okay, this is the audience that I'm targeting, and this is what's happening here, here, and here. So actually, I think it's absolutely fine, and actually I think it's brilliant that the sport has got so big, because I think there is plenty of space for all of these different types of medias. I'm in my 40s now, and I love what the content creators are doing, and I think absolutely fair play to them. TV, being in front of a camera, was never something that appealed to me, but I love what they're doing because it's attracting a different kind of audience. And then that grows, and then suddenly they find our podcast, and then someone finds our podcast, and then they maybe go and find Autosport because they want to know a bit more about the techie side. And I think we can very much all live together in harmony. We can help each other grow. And I think for the brands that are coming in, you can see it. You can see the different fans. You can see the amount of business that's happening. There's just been a new F1 business publication that's launched called Sector. And that's really interesting because, to your point about the commercial side, how much it's grown, it now warrants its own publication, just the business side of the sport on its own. That's how much it's grown. That's how much it's changed. That would never, ever have happened when I started out in the sport in 2016.
In terms of understanding some of that growth and some of that change in the audiences that are out there, do you look to other sports at all? I mean, it's a tricky one because the only sports I can think of that, particularly in terms of their scale and commercial profile, but the only sports would be football and US major leagues. But do you have some of the ways that you've thought about how to approach the sport come just organically through your experiences with it, or do you look across to other communities as well to get a sense of that?
I'm forever trying to steal other people's better ideas than my own. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think I'm not claiming I'm the best podcaster. I'm not claiming I have all the ideas. I think there are some really smart, intelligent storytellers out there. I listen to a lot of podcasts because obviously podcasts in themselves are fairly new, but I want to improve the product I'm putting out. So I listen to as many different podcasts as I can, not just sport. Sport is my first love, but I listen to loads of different podcasts, even down to, how do you do the intros? How do you do the outros? That 3-minute rule where you have to keep people interested constantly, you're forever learning about how to do them. So yeah, I'm forever taking inspiration, even down to social media. The content creators, the influencers, I love what they're doing. I'm learning from them constantly. I love looking at other sports and how they're doing it and how they take their podcast and how they turn that into 5 days of content. And it's just every day you're learning, aren't you? Everything, it's all new media, really. And so no, I'm absolutely looking around and seeing who's doing it better and then stealing their idea.
Have you watched the F1 movie yet?
No.
You haven't? Great. We'll skate past that one because I haven't watched it either. I think
it's funny. It's funny because people keep asking. It comes out, and I will watch it. And I wasn't in Canada, which is where they did the media preview. And I've just not. I just never get to. I've got 2 young kids. I never get out of the house really most of the time unless I'm working and traveling the world. But I barely get to the cinema. I certainly can't tell you the last time I went to cinema.
Yeah.
So no, I haven't watched it. But I feel like I've watched it because the storyline is fairly obvious. As you can probably guess what it is. I found it difficult to suspend my belief of Brad Pitt being a Formula One driver, given he's in his 50s. No offense to people in their 50s, but you're not generally still a pro athlete driving Formula One cars at that age. And they filmed so much of it in the paddock while I was there. I sort of feel like I watched it in real time anyway. So no, I haven't seen it. I will watch it.
Yeah, should we be looking out for you in the background?
No, but it's funny. Everyone who's watched it is always like, "Oh, I saw so and so. I saw so and so," and basically everyone in the paddock is just watching it to see if they're in it.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet. I was invited to a screening, but my second child was being born on the day of that screening, so I had to make a call there. Yeah, but I think that's
the kids. They always get in the way of going to cinema. Yeah, telling you.
The dimension of that, I suppose, is the on-screen product has been so revolutionary for so long that it's sort of where do you take it next? But I have a bit of a pet theory that maybe that's the next frontier for Formula One is mass screenings of stuff and kind of festivalization of the viewing experience as much as anything else. But
I think you're 100% right. I think the F1 movie has had a bigger impact on Formula One than I think any of us actually realize at this point, Formula One included. So one of the biggest things to come from the movie is the fact that Apple are going to be streaming all of the races next year in the US. They're taking over from ESPN. It's a 5-year deal. And speaking to lots of people about the deal, it's absolutely fascinating. So in the first year, they're basically just going to take F1 TV, which is the in-house broadcast. And then from the second year, they're going to start experimenting a bit with presenters, commentators, lineups, basically. What happens at the moment with ESPN is that they do not do any shoulder programming. You literally turn on the race, you get the Sky coverage from the UK, race finishes, goes off again. What Apple are going to start doing is that shoulder programming, because that's a key thing. We know most people turn on for the race and they turn off at the end of the race, but there is still an enormous audience that want, all the fluff around it. So Apple are going to be experimenting for a couple of years, and then come year 4 of the deal, they very much want to be in place with what they're doing so that they can have year 4, 5 of the deal absolutely hammering it. My feeling is that this could lead to a global streaming deal, like the first ever of its kind. Apple take over everything. The Sky deal runs until the end of 28, I think it is off the top of my head, possibly 29. And I think Apple are going to want to come in and basically just take over F1. What they did with the film was brilliant because the people who made the F1 film also made Top Gun 2 Maverick.
Yeah.
And what they did was they took the cameras from Top Gun and they put them on the F1 cars, but they made them, because it's a few years in between, they made them even smaller. And what they are now doing next year, which I think is actually really cool, is the Apple TV product that you'll get in the US and I think will actually become part of the World Service globally, is they're going to be using those cameras. So in real time, you'll be watching that top quality sort of inside the helmet driver's view, not that blurry one that we currently have at the moment. So you're going to get amazing footage coming out of it. Then you have got this Apple deal, which I think will end up being a global streaming platform. And I think that will revolutionize how we watch it, because like you say, it's not just about TV, right? It's about that younger audience who we're all told constantly don't have attention spans, although I don't fully believe that. I think they just have too much choice. You know, then they have the snippets that go straight onto social media or however you consume your sport. And I think the Apple deal, the Apple film, will completely change how we're watching Formula One in the next 5 years.
Yeah, but that I find that relationship is really cool, and it feels like Formula One. You know, I think it was in a bit of a holding pattern during the last years of Eccleston, because obviously they were trying to get a deal done and all the rest of it. But it feels like it's reclaimed a bit of that identity and the idea that it's kind of the apex for relationship between sport and technology and glamour and culture and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think we have the conversation a lot, don't we? Is Formula One sport or is it entertainment? And I don't know why we have to choose. And in fact, I don't think sport and entertainment, why can't they be bedfellows? I think if you're watching sport, you love it for a reason. You probably love it because, if you've ever watched a film based on sport, the thing that happened in real life is generally better because it's one of the, for me, sport is utterly brilliant. You win, you lose, the highs, the lows, everything that goes with it. I'm a Liverpool fan, so I am very low at the moment. But not that long ago, I was having massive highs. And I think with sport and with entertainment, you're not watching sport because it's boring. You're not watching sport because, you know what's going to happen. You want to be entertained by what you're watching. And so for Formula One to put on these shows, the Super Bowls, as Liberty Media like to call it, well, okay, I quite like American sport and I like how they do it. And I've been to a lot of the American F1, I've been to, in fact, most of them in recent years. And I like how they do it. I like the added razzmatazz that they put around it. I like the concerts that they do around it to try and get more people in, a different audience in, possibly, who could then end up liking the sport. And I think that's okay. I think sport can be entertainment, and I think it probably should be entertaining, or else none of us are going to be watching it. And I think that relationship, how that has changed under Liberty Media, like you say with Bernie Oxton, it was like nothing really happened while CBC were trying to sell it. Liberty Media, a media company, come in with these big grand ideas. Okay, they get a bit lucky with COVID and Drive to Survive. They're the first to admit it. But they've also done a brilliant thing. They've brought in great races, like Vegas has been really fun. They brought in Miami, which has been great. Okay, we go to the Middle East a lot. And despite what happened in Qatar, the images aren't great from the 3 grandstands and not a lot of people who were there for the penultimate race, potentially championship winning race. But they will argue it's a business. $50 million a year speaks volumes, let's be honest, which is what some of these Middle Eastern races pay to host a race every year. So I think it's striking that balance, isn't it? It's the big, glitzy glamour of Monaco, of Vegas, of Miami, of even Silverstone have got on board. And Silverstone, that race is now utterly brilliant. And it was always quite fun, but even they've taken it up another notch. Zandvoort is wild. I would highly recommend Zandvoort if you ever get a chance to go. It won't be around for much longer. But there's a lot of fun to be had. And I think one of the things that I like about what Liberty Media have come in and done is that they've sort of lent into that. They've lent into, they've Americanized the sport. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Actually, I think it's a positive. They've brought in these sprint races. We have 6 of those a year just to try and make the action on track mean something. Before we had just 3 1-hour sessions of practice. I cannot tell you how boring practice is, seriously. Or even I wouldn't watch it unless I was getting paid to, let me tell you. It's very boring. So fair play. They try to bring in more action. And I think that's a very good thing. Doesn't always work. Having a sprint race in Qatar, terrible idea on a track you can't race on. Again, money speaks volumes. But at least they're trying stuff. At least they're trying to make it more exciting. And I think all credit to them for it.
Yeah. Now, we were hoping when we scheduled this that Lando Norris might do us a favour, purely in the interest of this conversation and wrap things up in Qatar, because I think everybody else is probably pretty happy, other than him and his fans, pretty happy that it's going to this kind of 3-way finale that is happening about 2 days after this podcast goes out. So we won't dwell on that aspect too much. But, what do you think we've learned in the 2025 season, it feels like it's been quite a good season for an Inside the Piranha Club style podcast about the kind of human aspects behind some of these decisions, particularly in the last 6 weeks or so. But,
Yeah, I mean,
what have we learned, and how are we set up now with these three guys in particular for another generation of racing?
I love the mental side of sport. I love the psychology of it. And I think this season has been utterly brilliant. It hasn't gone how many of us expected it to. So at the end of last year, it was very much between McLaren and Ferrari. We thought that might be how this season started. Ferrari, it has been an absolute disaster. Lewis Hamilton, his debut season with them, I mean, it's just one horror show after another. He is incredibly down. There's what looks like infighting, blame games going on. The chairman has come out and told the drivers to speak less. I just think not listening to a 7-time world champion is probably what's wrong with Ferrari. I don't think that's a good idea. Charles Leclerc, his teammate, is fantastic, but also struggling. So I think that's been a bit strange. And then we had the McLarens who did come out of the blocks fastest. Lando Norris absolutely expected to be the favourite, but he has a terrible start to the season. And actually, it's Oscar Piastri, in only his third season in the sport, who everyone thought would be the number 2 driver, be a bit of an underdog and play the wingman. Actually, he's the one who came out. I think he won 4 of the first 5 races. Absolutely brilliant. Max Verstappen in that Red Bull. The Red Bull was rubbish. Absolutely rubbish. Then we had, at Red Bull, we had the big team principal change. Christian Horner was unceremoniously fired with about 2 hours' notice. That was after the British Grand Prix in July. Laurent Mekies came in and everything changed there at Red Bull. So then you had a complete shift in culture. Obviously, it takes quite a long time to change culture, but he did a couple of things very quickly, which is he decided to listen to his drivers more. You'll notice the pattern here. And he was saying, Mekies was saying that they were too much into the data, too much into the engineering, and actually they weren't taking on driver feedback enough. And then, the rest, as they say, is history. In terms of Verstappen is now 12 points behind Lando Norris in the championship going into Abu Dhabi, having been 104 at the end of the summer break. It is truly astonishing what he has achieved. And at the same time, Verstappen's having this big comeback. Oscar Piastri has completely fallen off the boil. Mentally, it looked like he'd gone. It was like watching Rory McIlroy in the back nine at the Masters all those years ago. It was pretty difficult to watch. While at the same time, the other side of the garage of Lando Norris, he's having a resurgence. He's suddenly performing like the driver we were expecting at the start of the year. He comes from a 34-point deficit to now be leading the championship, as I say, by 12 points. Oscar Piastri, despite dominating in Qatar, should have won the race, except McLaren made a big mistake, handing Verstappen the win. It's been an absolute mess. Max Verstappen came out, a bit of a winding up going on here, I think, to say if I'd been driving the McLaren, I'd won the championship ages ago. So, yeah, it's been utterly, utterly brilliant this season. And I think whoever wins into Abu Dhabi, and I honestly don't care, there is a fantastic story to tell behind each of those 3 drivers. And at the end of the day, I think the fans win.
Fantastic. Well, we'll leave that part of the conversation there. And don't tell us what happens if you're listening to us in the future. 3 questions we ask every guest before we let them go. The first is, do you have an origin story or something that sparks your interest in sport?
I've never known a time of not liking sport. I'm the youngest of 4. I grew up in a house where there was pretty much only sport on TV. When I remember the 92 Olympics being called in, I was playing outside with friends, being called in to watch the 100-meter final, and I loved it. I did athletics as a child. I started training properly from the age of 8. I just don't know. I have absolutely no idea. My dad, my brother are big Liverpool fans. It wasn't a choice for me. Both massively into motorsport. Again, I'm the youngest one, so I just idolized my brother, and he watched Formula One, so I watched Formula One, and nothing particularly. There was just, my house was just full of sport growing up, so I've never known anything else.
Okay. What's your favorite piece of sports storytelling?
This is a really tricky one. I think sport itself, I know that's probably a bit of a cop-out answer, but I just think with every single piece of sport that happens, there is always some extraordinary tale behind it. Be it the good stories of, Lewis Hamilton winning his 7th title, or, the controversies of what happened in 21, or, you look at cycling with Lance Armstrong. There are all these stories, good or bad, the people behind the sport, the biggest stories that you have here, South Africa winning the Rugby World Cup back in '95. I just think sport in itself is the best storyteller of them all. And I think that's one of the reasons I love it. And I think that's probably why I got into journalism as well. I love a story. I like to think I'm a storyteller. I love the emotions. I love the people. I love particularly the teamwork. And that probably sounds a bit mad because I cover Formula One. People don't really understand that it's actually probably the biggest teamwork sport out there. 2,000 people involved in getting just a car around one lap. So yeah, I think sport itself is the best storyteller.
Okay.
Cop-out answer, sorry.
With that in mind, it leads us nicely on to the last question. What's a sports story you'd like to tell or see somebody else tell?
I'll tell you the story I'm really excited about is, and this I can probably thank my dad for because he was massively into the Isle of Man TT. My mum tells stories about how he used to take her. I'm from Ireland originally, from Dublin, and my dad used to take my mum on dates to the Isle of Man TT. So I'm really excited about the Netflix Keanu Reeves, Brad Pitt, I think it's Netflix documentary that's coming out that they're doing at the moment about the Isle of Man TT. It's an utterly brilliant event. Utterly terrifying event.
Yeah.
It is still, you see them hurtling down the road hundreds of miles an hour, people perilously close to the edge. There are no barriers. I am really, really excited to watch that.
Okay, well, we'll look out for that. And yeah, look out for another season of Formula One after this one. It's been a fascinating few weeks. It's been a fascinating hour of your time, Rebecca. Thanks very much for that. Thanks for coming on.
No, thank you very much for having me on.
Outlines is an original production from 2640.